Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the Pitkin Board of County Commissioners regular meeting of Wednesday, October 28th, 2015. Phyllis, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
There is one. The application from the Sausage Queen, instead of being continued, is being tabled until further notice, and it'll be noticed at the appropriate time again in the future when it comes back.
Is it tabled or actually withdrawn?
Table.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who would wish to make a public comment about this at this time about items that are not on the rest of the agenda? If you could go up to the table by the microphone there.
Thank you.
And state your name for the record, so
Okay.
this is being recorded.
My name is Dick Butera. I live on Castle Creek Road. And thank you for giving me a chance to
Welcome.
spend a few minutes. This is a very long story, but I've worked it down to a couple of minutes. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Excuse me. So 8 years ago, my son and I left our driveway on Castle Creek Road. And as we came down the road, we were shocked to see construction equipment, blinking lights, construction workers, bulldozers, and I said, what in the world is this? And so I took him to school in downtown to find out what it was all about. And what it was all about was a $2.1 million construction project to build a trail from the music school to the Merle housing. So I decided to look into this thing and see what it was all about. What I found out was that the trail was 3,300 feet long. It was a contract with Peter Kiewit and Company for $2.1 million to build the trail, $633 a lineal foot. It also included cutting down 100% of the trees from the hospital to the music school, 100% of the trees. It was a 4 feet wide. I found out that it was a 4 feet wide trail with concrete abutments on both sides for most of the way, cantilevered over some private properties, and realized that the county doesn't build 4 foot wide trails, and that surprised me. So we decided that we had to do something about it as citizens. The people who lived there and were being damaged directly had their own standing as people not wanting this trail. I was shocked as a citizen. I had nothing to gain or lose other than it seemed like an outrageous set of circumstances. So I looked into it, and the press was saying that we filed an injunction and we won and stopped the construction. And they said we were doing it because we didn't want one lane of Castle Creek closed for the summer. I couldn't quite understand why that was the big reason, but it had nothing to do with it. So what we tried to make clear to the trails people, that they never had a public meeting. They never told any of us about it. It was, they said they went to the caucus, but no one goes to the caucus meetings unless there's a formal call. So they really did this without any public notice. Well, we filed the injunction and we won, and then we filed a lawsuit to stop the whole project. And realizing the whole time, when a citizen sues his government, he can't win. Because I am the government. You guys represent me, and I'm filing a suit against myself, and it's a terrible thing to do, and it's extraordinarily expensive. So we tried to talk to the trails people to no avail. We said to them, look, why are you doing this? We're doing it because the Aspen Country Day kids and the music student kids need safety to get to the Merle housing. Well, I said, well, there's never been a child live in Merle housing that goes to Aspen Country Day, and there probably never will be. At $25,000 a year, I doubt whether Merle housing people are going to go there. Secondly, I said the music students never walk there. My son and I go in and out 3 or 4 times a day. We see one of them every other couple of days walking, but mostly RAFTA has bus service every 30 minutes to the music school until 10 o'clock at night. And my son and I keep a little record in the car for the last 2 summers whenever we go by there and don't see a bus, A, and B, how many kids we see on the buses. Well, in 2 summers, there's been one time that we've ever gone by the music school that there was not a bus going in or out. We estimate, because that's all it is, that 70% of the buses are empty, okay? So I said to the trail people, look, rather than give the money to lawyers, I'll buy you a van, and you can hire a high school kid and fill in the gaps between the buses going and take these kids wherever they need to go, but let's not waste $2.1 million. Well, that was turned down. So I went to Peter Kiewit, and I said, because I have friends at Peter Kiewit, they're the second largest home builder in the country. I mean, home builder, road builder in the country. And I said, what are you doing building a trail in Aspen? Well, they had done the airport project, big project. And they said the county asked us to bid it because there was nobody bidding, and all the builders in that time were real busy. So we just threw a bid in, and we're shocked that we got it. I said, well, okay, are you going to build it? And they said, well, not now, you have it stopped. Well, that was sort of strange. So if we add it all up, we had a trail being built for $2.1 million, but it was more than that because the county had done an enormous amount of engineering because part of the trail was cantilevered, sort of like Cemetery Lane, and there are hundreds of hours of staff time. And it was a big deal with the planners to get this trail done, and I couldn't figure it out because now take a breath and say the music kids are here for 9 weeks a year. And we're going to spend $2.1 million on a trail that's only used 9 weeks. If, in fact, it were used in the winter, it would be covered up by snowplows for most of the winter, half of the year. So this was really millions of dollars being spent for these children that come from all over the world to be safe. Well, I looked into that. There's never been an accident of a music student in the last 30 years walking on Castle Creek Road. There's never been an accident with a biker in the last 50 years on the lower part of Castle Creek Road in an accident. And then I went to the biking community because Mick and a few people told the press and the biking community, Butera doesn't care about your safety. So not one biker said they would ride on a 4-foot wide trail with concrete abutments on it and children possibly walking on it. So that was a myth. So each one of these reasons that the trails people keep giving us that they're going to build this thing doesn't hold water. And then I pointed out to them, in the spring, there's rock slides across the other side of Castle Creek. And the county maintenance people go by there 2 or 3 days a week and clean the rocks off of Castle Creek Road. Well, one of these rocks, could cause an accident one day if they were using it for kids. So, as I say, I couldn't find one valid reason with the buses running every 30 minutes. They wouldn't take my van, so we won the lawsuit. 56-page opinion by Judge Nichols, very slamming the county because of their behavior. They didn't go through the process that they make everybody else go through. Well, then what the county did, I don't know if you were commissioners at the time, they changed the rules where you don't have to go through the process anymore. So now I'm worried because I read in the press they're doing it again 8 years later, using the same reasoning. We got to protect the Aspen Country Day kids. We got to protect the music students walking to the Meralt housing. I mean, it's so strange. And I wanted to get here early because I understand the best time to discuss these things is before they're budgeted and approved, and then you can't stop them. But the bid will not be $2.1 million this time. It'll be much higher. They're talking about making it 8 feet wide, so it's a legitimate county trail because the county doesn't build 4-foot wide trails. And in that case, the early cost analysis by the trails people 8 years ago was $6 million to build an 8-foot wide trail. So I'm here today to ask you to discuss this matter with the trails people and see if there's a value added component to this where it's really worth for us to take these millions of dollars. I mean, I'd rather see you put guardrails all the way up to the top because there's some very dangerous places that Coke was going to take care of. there's plenty of places to spend $2 million. The money that we spent, Eddie Wachs and me, to win the lawsuit at Judge Nichols, then the county appealed it. And they lost the appeal. And guess what they did next? They appealed it to a higher court and lost again. Eddie and I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to protect our interest as citizens. He had property rights, I had citizens' rights. And all I can say to you is that we have a history of giving money to school teachers, hospital workers, and single moms. For those 2 years, they didn't get any. The lawyers got it all. So let's not get into any of that kind of stuff. Let's have open discussions and see if there is a value added to these millions of dollars that they're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, and I know the discussion has just barely started about the Castle Creek Trail. I know it is a concept that has come back, but we appreciate your comments, and I've noted the main points that you made on my notes here, so.
Okay, and if there is a discussion, I'd love to be invited.
Okay.
You will be
Thank
invited.
you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dave.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make public comments at this time? Are there any commissioner comments? George?
I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate Letitia Ingram. Letitia Ingram is a Basalt High School teacher, and she has just received the Colorado Outstanding Teacher Award, and which is just amazing. Basalt is the smallest high school in the valley, one of the smallest schools in the state, and we've got an outstanding teacher that was nominated and received the Outstanding Teacher of the Year for the state of Colorado, which then allows her to go forth and apply, be an applicant for the National Teacher of the Year. So congratulations to Basalt High School, to Letitia. And it brings me to another point. We have an election next Tuesday. And if we want to have outstanding teachers, if we want to have outstanding schools, if we want to have our kids have that education that they all deserve and that we all need for our future, we need to support our schools. The Aspen School District has a ballot issue for a mill levy, and the RE1 School District has a bond issue for the entire district, which includes all 3 schools in all those communities. So I urge everyone to vote to begin with, and to vote for your schools and to vote for the future of our kids. Thank you.
Steve, can I?
Patty?
Yeah, and tagging on to George's comments about Basalt, I want to thank the town of Basalt, the town manager, and their town trustees for a meeting that we had last night with the Board of County Commissioners and with the town of Basalt. We had a few topics to cover, but as part of that meeting, and I wish I had brought the list of names, the mayor allowed the county commissioners to present awards to trustworthiness citizens from the school district. And it was really neat to have these young kids come up, and there was a little statement about what they had done that was amazing. One young girl was passed out a test. It happened to be the key, all the answers for the test, and she immediately turned it in to the teacher, to the principal, and she was given an honor for trustworthiness. It was really neat to have Basalt do that, and in just to bring the young population into their meeting room and honor them. And it's kind of like our Pitkin Cares Awards that we do, PitkinCounty Cares Awards. And it was nice that Basalt let the Board of Commissioners read some of the awards. It was a nice touch to the meeting. And on George's note about the election, I know Rachel's going to do a thing about voting, but what is the county ballot question is 1B?
1B.
1B. The county has a ballot question on about providing broadband. Right now it's to address a state statute that does not allow the county to go into public-private partnerships for issues related to broadband services. So we really encourage the voters in PitkinCounty to support the county's question. Apparently there are 17 other counties that have the ballot question on in order to address the state statute because we were unable to get the state legislature to address it on a statewide level at last year's legislative session. So we encourage the people to vote in support of the county ballot question and to vote. And Rachel, I'll segue to Rachel, who I know is going to present you issues about voting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patty. Pardon me. Just to elaborate a little bit further on that broadband question, the question we are asking is to use a opt-out exemption that was written into the original statute. So it's not to overturn it. It is following the procedure prescribed in that statute. Unfortunately, the statute's over 10 years old, and the broadband telecommunications and devices industry and world has changed so rapidly that it really just hasn't gotten caught up. And currently, we would be prohibited from participating in any system that's much faster than dial-up speeds. And so that has made it extremely difficult for us to either apply for grants and to provide capital that might enhance the service. As we all know, we don't have any broadband up Independence Pass and certainly not up many of our rural valleys. And this is just a way that we see as both a safety and a economic opportunity, as well as educational opportunity for all those kids who are supposed to do their homework on the internet anymore at night. So we really can have some disadvantages. I did want to mention that you should have received your ballot in the mail, and it is addressed to go back to the clerk's office. Today being Wednesday, they are suggesting that you now drop those ballots off, that to be assured that your vote is received by next Tuesday at 5 p.m. or when 7 p.m. By the clerk's office, that you go ahead and drop that off. And in Aspen, you can drop them off at the main Plaza One building where you get your driver's licenses, the current clerk's office, or at the vote center at the, they are still there, aren't they? I was hoping.
At the clerk's office and at the Jewish Center.
And at the Jewish Shabbat Center on Main Street. I don't know if there is a down valley drop. I thought Janice was going to be here today. I don't think there's one in the Mid Valley. Are they collecting some at Redstone? Do
I
you
don't
know?
think they did a drop off
No.
in either place.
So it's really important to make sure your ballot is counted. And if you've not yet received a ballot for any reason, or you lost it, or you messed it up when you're filling it in and want a new one, you can get a new ballot. And go online to pitkinvotes.org, and you will be able to look up, has your ballot been received, if you've already mailed it in. So that way you can assure yourself it hasn't been lost in the mail. You do need to sign the back of the envelope and date it, and then just fill in the questions on the inside. So similar to George, I wanted to encourage people to take a hard look at financing some of the tax measures that are on the ballot. And as people know, I'm a little bit of a traveling commissioner. I go to a lot of regional and national events. I just came back from the Rural Action Caucus in Ouray, Colorado 2 weekends ago. And these were rural communities from Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Carolina, all across the country. And the one thing that they were all looking for was how do they assure themselves a sustainable, vibrant, healthy community. And the questions always came back to, do we have good medical equipment? Do we have good medical care for our community nearby? Do we have good educational opportunities for our children so that they can be a workforce where people want to relocate businesses to, or so that they can get professional jobs as they age and be able to support a healthy family and a healthy community? And thinking about that in the various questions, including the Down Valley School District, in the Basalt RE1, as well as the Aspen School District, the Hospital District, and some of the others, I think that when you invest in yourself, you thrive. And we are being asked to invest in ourselves. These questions have all been vetted by citizen review panels, community involvement, and are part of long-term strategic planning. And so I would just encourage people to vote yes and invest in ourselves and our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I have 2 items I want to do announcements on. Tomorrow, Jerome Osentowski from the Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute on the Frying Pan Road is doing a presentation at the Basalt Library from 5 until 7. He has a new book called The Forest Garden Greenhouse, and if you've ever had the opportunity to visit Jerome's greenhouse,
Pretty neat.
it is absolutely amazing what he grows up there at over 7,000 foot elevation. a lot of tropical fruits and a huge variety of different fruit trees and whatnot. So tomorrow, 5 till 7 at the Basalt Library, he's doing a presentation and I think probably a book signing about his book. The other item has to do with an event taking place on November 10th, Tuesday evening from 5:30 to 7. And this is a community read and discussion about this book called Being Mortal. The author is Atul Gawande. And I've been reading this book. It's very easy read and very informative. This event is being sponsored by the PitkinCounty Senior Services, Home Care and Hospice of the Valley, the Chabad Jewish Community Center, and PitkinCounty Library are some of the sponsors of it. You can get this book for $5 either at the library, at the Senior Center on Castle Creek Road, or at the hospital gift shop on Castle Creek Road for $5. So I recommend it's very interesting, talking about palliative care and end-of-life care for people. So that event again is on November 10th from 5:30 to 7. So I urge those of you interested to look into that.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, any other comments?
I want to just briefly say that Pathfinders of Aspen is also a sponsor, and they help people with end-of-life and challenging issues like cancer.
Okay, moving on to our consent items. The first is the minutes of October 14th, regular meeting, and work sessions of September 15th, 22nd, October 6th and 13th, and October 19th, special meeting.
I would make a motion to approve.
I will second, and thank you, Jeanette.
And I found one mistake, Jeanette. On the very first page of that, the October 14th meeting, it's recognizing Chris Klug, and it should read for his volunteer work in Pitkin County. And that was when we were doing all the proclamations honoring all the people who do the wonderful things. Okay, any other discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have an application for medical marijuana infused products manufacturer license and retail marijuana products manufacturer license submitted by John Conlon, doing business as the Sausage Queen.
That item's been pulled.
So do we need to make a motion to continue it?
I think we need now,
Motion to table.
we're not going to continue it because they are withdrawing their,
So I'll make a motion to table this
Application.
item until further notice.
Second.
to,
To table it till further notice.
okay, to table it till further notice.
There's some changes, some major changes, not only with the corporate structure, but a new proposal. So we'll renotice it and bring you a whole new application back once we get notice from the state that that corporate change has been accepted by the state.
So due to the changes in the corporate structure of the company, it'll be coming back to us. And also the questions that I think Rachel and I specifically answered at the last meeting will be answered at a future date.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to table this until further notice. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous. Next, we have individual consideration items, second readings, and these are all public hearing. First one is a resolution adopting the revised Pitkin County Nordic Ski Trails Plan. And Gary Tenenbaum is here to present that.
And I've got friends. John, yeah.
And
And we got, yes, I'm Gary Tenenbaum with the Assistant Director of Open Space and Trails, and I've got.
I'm Matt Kuhn. I'm the Trails Manager for the City of Aspen.
And John Wilkinson, I'm the president of the Aspen Snowmass Nordic Council.
Thought you were here for a library thing.
I can do that too. I can multiple hats.
Thank you.
So we are back on second reading for the update to the Nordic Ski Trails Management Plan. And so at the last meeting, overall, we did a full presentation on what the plan has. There was some good comments by the BOCC about adding a couple things to our characteristics, our criteria for choosing where we're going to expand. And we included wildlife as a criteria and also safety, especially for some of our backcountry areas, you know, up Maroon Creek and Independence Pass. There are some avalanche issues, so we need to assess the risk of safety when we're looking at new trails. Other than that, most of the plan is the same as last time, and you know, we are seeing if there are any further questions on it. And you know, I also want to give a chance to have John, who's the Nordic, you know, the Nordic Council is our advisory board to the Open Space Board and to you on how the Nordic ski system should be managed. And so I just wanted to, if you guys are okay, to give him a minute or two just to go over the planning, and because he was really the one who spearheaded getting this plan updated.
Thank you. We started this process to update the plan about 2.5 years ago. And I'd really like to thank Matt here and Austin Weiss and Scott Gordon, who worked at Alpine Bank, who has since moved to Denver. We got together about 2.5 years ago to go through the plan. We went through it line by line, word by word, and just looking forward on where we could go with the Nordic Trail system. And we are an advisory group, but however, we still have a budget, and we do have reserve money that we do things that are outside of the normal budget process that the county gives to the departments to do the grooming. We're coming out with a new map, and this thing is going to be great. The signing that we're going to be doing this winter is going to be magnificent on people being able to navigate around the Nordic trails. Specifically, I don't know if you saw that, but it's going to go to a numbering system where instead of coming up with great names for trails, it's going to be a number. It's going to be easier to read and easier to navigate. Our new map, we're going through the final proofing of that right now. That's going to be available this winter. So with that, I'd just like to thank the commissioners for supporting the Nordic. It's a huge benefit for our community. My kids both ski raced all through AVSC, through middle school and high school, and my daughter raced in college. I've been all over the country. And I can tell you, we have some of the finest Nordic skiing in North America, and it's absolutely free to the user. There's a cost there that is paid for through our taxes, through the open space tax, of which we absolutely support as well. So with that, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, John.
Any questions or comments? Rachel?
Yeah, I want to thank you for including our comments from the last meeting and for your work putting this together to begin with as an update to the previous plan. I think it really maps out a pretty exciting vision for the future. And so I don't have any additions to the master plan, as it were, but I do think it would be worth perhaps having an addendum or a statement of some sort. I mean, it can be standalone about how you integrate these Nordic trails with the resort marketing and the resort promotion. Because there is just a lot of taxpayer dollars being spent, and as you said, it is a great attraction, a great amenity for a town that's often considered so expensive. This is free. But how do we really use that in a way? And I'm not talking about going overboard or anything, believe you me, but I also don't want to keep our light underneath a bushel. And the county is going through its our budget process this year. And so our strategic plan has within every area, how do they relate to economic sustainability and economic prosperity. And so just as we expend these dollars, I'd like to have some consideration about how do we get the bang for the buck related to a guest coming and going and perhaps never even knowing about this. I, as you know, John, I used to do the brochures, and so there were years when there were trail maps to distribute and years when there weren't, and it was like, well, just pick them up at the location because we didn't print that many, and sometimes you're independent agents, as it were, would advertise cross-country ski rentals or cross-country trail guides. But I just would like some thought going into that as we go in the future years. Thank you.
I'm going to tag on to that. I'm going to look right at you, John, because in the next year, probably or so, we're going to be looking at the reauthorization of our open space and trails mill levy, and we're going to be calling on you, so you can really help us support it from the Nordic side. But I think that's going to be important, and we know where to find you, usually at the library or on the Nordic trails.
No, we
on
totally,
the bike trails.
I mean, I go back to the days where we had each three community paying a third,
Right.
Snowmass Village, Aspen, PitkinCounty, having it rolled under one Aegeus with the county really made a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's made a difference too over the years, so we can see that. But thank you for your time, John, for all the time that you give.
John, I brought this up in our first reading about the mountain bikes using the Nordic trails. And I was surprised you didn't have a little section on it in this plan. Realizing mountain biking is not Nordic skiing, that was the reason that we were told you had decided not to put that in, but I presume you must have some strategy in mind for publicity about mountain bikes on the ski trails, or what places mountain bikes can go. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, when we first started looking at the plan, we did talk about how do we handle other users, not just mountain bikes or fat bikes, you know, walkers, snowshoers, and whatnot. We came to the conclusion that we're a Nordic ski organization, and that is our primary focus. And that's why we talk about it a little bit in the plan, but we don't make any accommodation other than we have designated two areas that you can ride bikes on the Nordic trails, one being the Rio Grande Trail, and the other one, the Merle loops. And so we've designated those two areas is where you can take fat bikes. Now, I understand the Roaring Fork Mountain Bike Association is going to be doing some development of trails just for snow bikes this winter. They have their own drag line that's going to be out there. So, you know, we decided to stay specific to Nordic skiing because really our platform, we're limited to where we can go with our Nordic skiing. You have to have a groomed area, and we only groom a certain amount of terrain. But quite frankly, if you want to bike, you can bike anywhere that you want to. I know a lot of people that ride up Smuggler in the winter and back into Hunter Creek. You got the Independence Pass, you can ride up there. So there's a lot of opportunities for the people that want to continue riding bikes in winter. But as you know, I'm an avid cyclist, and I've always said I ski in the winter and bike in the summer, and you know, try not to overlap too much. But that was our thinking behind that.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to for a resolution adopting the revised PitkinCounty Nordic Trails Management Plan.
Second. And this is a public hearing, so I open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who would wish to comment about this at this time? Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the board. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you,
Okay,
thank you,
unanimous.
Dan.
Great. Very nice, well laid out plan. Next, we have a resolution authorizing the Beone Gulch property acquisition.
Thanks, Steve. And we had a good discussion of this on first reading while Matt's getting our map on the screen. I'll just cover the basics of it. Last spring, we purchased what we are now calling the Lazy Glen open space, also known as the old Kirjanoff property. And that sits on the Roaring Fork River just below the Conoco Bridge. This property we're presenting today is adjacent to that Lazy Glen open space, immediately upstream and also on the north side of the river. And the reason that it's of interest to the Open Space Board and staff, is primarily, frankly, because it offers access to federal lands administered by the BLM up Beone Gulch. The fact that it's also contiguous with an existing open space and can be merged to that open space is nice. And because of that existing open space, we have got the capacity to add whatever sorts of trailhead facilities might become useful over time. You can see on our map that we have an existing trailhead, the Arciero trailhead. It's been there for a long time, fairly limited capacity. The route up Beone Gulch, and I don't think my laser pointer is going to work on this map, so I'll use this one over behind you guys. Sorry, but we've depicted it on the. Well, no, we haven't. We've depicted our boundary line adjustment, but the trail really.
Excuse me 1 second. They've told us that you need to use the pointer on the computer for it to show up online.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Then the
Because the pointer
TV
doesn't-
audience can
yeah,
see
then
where
the-
you're pointing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, and
So
you can see too.
where the little hand is here is about where the route drops down onto the Rio Grande Trail. I understand one of our commissioners went and verified this last weekend, so he can add his commentary, but it climbs up to an old ditch alignment that wraps around like this, and you get to the mouth of Beone Gulch proper, and you find this old wagon road that goes up the hill to a mine. It switches back around the top and comes into the Beone Gulch across a shoulder, drops into the gulch, well into the BLM land. And like Albany Gulch, this one is a beautiful area up there. It's slick Red Rock Canyon, intermittent creek in the bottom of it. And it's kind of like the hole in the wall that Butch Cassidy used to go through. Once you go through that little mouth of Beone Gulch, it opens wide open again, even though the entrance is very narrow. So we're pretty excited to add that. Fortunately, in this case, unlike a couple projects we've done this year, the owner of the property is willing to divide off the undeveloped portion, and we are proposing to subdivide this right down the center line of the main stem of the Roaring Fork. We will utilize the county subdivision exemption process. A pre-app has already been done, so that's in the pipeline. So far, we haven't encountered any issues with our normal due diligence, and the Open Space Board unanimously recommended this. Anything I forgot, Matt?
After we're considering after we do close on this, if we do close on this property, we'd eliminate this line right here. Thus, we'd have what we're calling the Lazy Glen open space. We could connect it to this property. Therefore, we'd have approximately a little over 70 acres just as one parcel, and therefore we could just remove this boundary line. And that way we just stay still 2 parcels, the retained 3-acre parcel and then the continuous 70-acre open space parcel.
Patty?
Yeah, there was my understanding that there may be some concerns about utility easements. Did we clear those up or find them, or?
We have noticed, we have a survey that's being done right now, and we received the title work that does show numerous utilities, but they're standard gas line, underground gas line utilities, overhead power lines, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we're clean on that?
I think the title is good as far as we have checked. We're not done. We haven't hit the deadline for making an objection on that. The issue that came up, though, is that when Source Gas did this
Right.
underground, they expanded their gas line. Interestingly enough, just up the way off the screen is a property that the county has conserved under a conservation easement. And we negotiated pretty vigorously with Source Gas at the time and narrowed the width of their disturbance and got pretty good re-veg. Well, unfortunately, the same thing didn't happen here, and there is a weed problem on that Source Gas alignment. And to address that, we have added a clause to the contract that holds 3,000 $3,000 in escrow, so that the landowner, the current landowner, Dan Johns, can either deal with it himself or hire someone to deal with it, and we have a right of inspection late next summer to ensure that that's been addressed.
Great, thank you.
George?
Yeah, I support this. This is a great addition to our Open Space and Trails program. It's another example of us being able to access public lands that were previously not available because it was on private property. And we've got parking right there, so there's not an issue with that. And as Dale said, from that parking area, it's probably only about 100 yards or so until you hit this old irrigation ditch. And from there, you're able to get onto a very easy old wagon road, and probably at about a mile up, you actually get away from the sounds and the sights of Highway 82, and you're looking up into a beautiful gulch and canyon that extends all the way up to the ridge top, which connects to the Albany-Kittle Trail. So it's really, I would say, a hidden treasure that the public is now going to be able to enjoy. So thank you for putting this together.
Thanks, George.
I have another quick question. So in light of the issue we had further, a little bit down valley, with the canyon that we just recently purchased in the management plan, so are we to then think about a management plan over the next year or so before we open all this up to the public?
Correct. That's our
Kind of our
standard
goal.
operating procedure, is to consult with BLM, CPW, neighbors, to make sure we understand the pros and cons of opening that up, and whether there's a seasonal closure issue, or if we discover an endangered species at Beone Gulch, maybe the whole subject will change a lot. But we will do that prior to
Great.
getting people in there.
Thank you.
I think all my questions, my main question was where is the trail that actually goes through there, and you've shown that. Looks like a terrific opportunity, and it's very reasonably priced. We're not getting a house with it, and
We like that?
We like that.
I echo what George said. The opportunity, another place where people can get onto public land, in this case BLM land, leading up to Forest Service land higher up. And a lot of these places have been so landlocked, you'd have to trespass through private property to go into them. And consequently, I've never been up there because I don't go trespassing through other people's land to go somewhere. I'm looking forward to it. I presume you would do a management plan for this piece. Would that be tied into the management plan for the Lazy Glen parcel and do them both together?
We're discussing that now with our stewardship crew, and I believe the answer is yes. We will defer the Lazy Glen management planning long enough to pick this up and wrap it all into one scoping, public input, and all of that.
And I think it might especially help if there is parking added by the barn on the Lazy Glen property for a public parking area, which might or might not be part of your management plan, but I think my gut feeling is it would be good to have additional parking there, since that Arciero trailhead is fairly small for a parking area.
And that's exactly one of the questions that will be looked at in the planning process before we open the gates.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment on this at this time? I see no comments. I'll bring it back to the commissioners. George?
I would make a motion to approve the acquisition of the Bionis Gulch property. I always pronounce that wrong.
Steve has the pronunciation, I think.
Beone.
Rhymes with
macaroni.
Gulch property.
That's the only way to remember.
There's a first and second to approve the ordinance authorizing the acquisition of this property. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next up, we have three different ordinances approving underground rights of way easements for source gas distribution between PitkinCounty and the PitkinCounty Capital Leasing Corporation with the City of Aspen and Quest Corporation doing business as Century Link. Jody?
On this
you.
side.
Jody Smith. I'm the facility superintendent, and I have
Patrick Raleigh with Stan Clausen Associates.
here to assist. So this is a second reading and adoption of the ordinance for these three utility easements. The background behind this is that we were doing a lot line adjustment on the Courthouse Plaza building located off of on Main Street, and that required a rezoning. And so during our first reading, we were asked to bring in a map just to be able to show the public and the board. So Patrick's going to just kind of run through what that looks like on the screen. It's a little different than what was in your packet. We do have hard copies for you. So I'll have Patrick just kind of run through what that change is for those utility easements and the boundary.
Thanks, Jody. That is correct. We rezoned this parcel, which contains the annex and the courthouse, to public, and removed this interior property line, so it's all one parcel now. There was an alley vacation where I'm indicating with the cursor that happened a number of years ago, but for reasons unknown, this portion of the alleyway was not vacated, so we're taking care of that oversight at this point. This is a site improvement survey showing the existing easements that are on the parcel, and these lines here, they kind of look like double lines, are the underground utilities, and I think we only made it into the easement area at that very corner. So what we are doing is correcting that, and then also there are additional utilities that are going up or down the driveway to the north, down the driveway behind the jail. That were not captured by easements. So this is the new area of easement. It will capture all of the easements, also going towards the north, and it will be in place until redevelopment occurs, at which time we can vacate these easements.
Patty?
In light of our discussion yesterday about facilities, that's a lot of utilities in areas we're going to be doing a lot of construction. So I'm assuming, and actually I would understand, that we have taken that into consideration, because as we know, moving utilities can be costly. And I think that's going to be part of our budgeting for this new building. But there's a lot of utilities. But I'm really glad that we've cleaned up putting the utilities actually in the easements where they belong and vacating that corner of an alley so the public doesn't think that that's a public alley over there. So I do appreciate the cleanup as part of this process. And thank you for the mapping.
The new public safety building, in addition to the plaza building, goes right over the top of the easement. So does that create any sort of problems? I mean, I presume we're providing the utilities right through the center of the building somehow, but how does that work?
In the construction design and plan right now that we're working on, we'll relocate all of those utilities. It's in the very initial discussion and planning, but it is to relocate all of that. Yesterday I met with the City of Aspen's Galena Plaza team and the team that is working on the development of the new Aspen Police Department facility. So we're actually looking at, and we met with engineering yesterday to actually put some conduits and a vault in the Galena alley now where they're working while it's open. So we're still, we're pulling all that together, trying to be forward-thinking, ahead of all of that to make sure we're capturing and realigning that now so that when we do abandon this piece during the process, it will be cleaned up.
And just so you're clear, this was a requirement by the City of Aspen that prior to redevelopment, that they wanted to get the utilities in an easement, you know, on the off chance that redevelopment doesn't occur in the future or
Right.
something like that. So it was a condition of approval from the city of Aspen.
So there's no danger that in the future, you're putting it in a conduit big enough that if something needs replacing, it could be pulled out. We don't have to take a track hoe into the basement of the new building and dig it up at any point, I would hope.
Right. Well, meeting with engineering, and again, nothing's defined right now, is to really move all those utilities out onto Main Street and around between the courthouse plaza and the new Aspen Police Department with a transformer. We have sewer lines. There's a lot of work to do.
Okay. This is a public comment issue. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address this issue? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Patty?
It's minor, do we need to do 3 separate on second reading?
Yes.
I
that's
think
what
we were able
told
to
last week.
move them through. So I will do motion to approve the underground right-of-way easement between the Board of County Commissioners of PitkinCounty and the City of Aspen. That's number 1. So do you want to vote on that first and then do the
Yes.
second, third?
Okay, I will second that motion.
Okay, it's moved to, and seconded to approve the first one between PitkinCounty and the City of Aspen. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, I will make a motion to approve an ordinance approving an agreement between the Board of County Commissioners of PitkinCounty and CenturyLink.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? This is for between PitkinCounty Board of Commissioners and CenturyLink. Jeanette? All in favor say aye. Aye.
And third, I will do a motion to approve an ordinance for an underground right-of-way easement between the PitkinCounty Board of County Commissioners and Source Gas Distribution LLC.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded to approve the third one between Board of County Commissioners and Source Gas. All in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Thanks for the map update.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have an ordinance authorizing the chair to execute an amended and restated agreement for grant and acceptance of the trail easement with Aspen Valley Ranch. And this was, let's see, it's being asked to continue it to November 18th.
That's correct, Steve.
Is that correct, John?
Yes, the board accepted this particular ordinance on first reading at the last regular meeting of the BOCC with one change to the text of the easement language. And the grantors of the easement are reviewing that change and just have not had a chance to formulate comments or to get back to me on that, and have asked for a continuation of the meeting, and that's the next available date.
Okay.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment about this item? Seeing none, bring it back to the board.
I would make a motion to continue to November 18th, the ordinance authorizing the chair to execute an amended and restated agreement for grant and acceptance of a trail easement from the Aspen Valley Ranch AH LLC.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded to continue this to November 18th. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and the last item of the second readings is a confirmatory reading for an emergency ordinance approving 2-year commercial lease agreements with Vectra Bank and the James E. Cox Living Trust for purpose of housing the office of the PitkinCounty Clerk and Recorder during the plaza renovation project. So,
John, you're here just in time.
Yeah, I know. And,
Yeah,
Jody
good timing.
stepped out. She probably didn't expect you to get to this, so let me put my mic on here. These leases have been proposed as part of the project that we are looking at for 2016
to improve our facilities at the courthouse plaza. And during that project, we don't anticipate that it'll be realistic for any employees to be working in the building or to be serving the public in the building during construction. And so we have been looking for spaces, particularly in the downtown core, for the clerk and recorder. The clerk and recorder has, a set of major publicly facing services, whether it be motor vehicle recording and elections. We wanted to keep them in the core, particularly because Aspen is the county seat and the clerk is required to have a presence in the core, but also for the least disruption to the public. After extensive searches, we felt that the best options that were the most financially feasible were the leases that are in front of you today. Those are for the basement of the Vectra Bank building, which will house the recording and motor vehicle functions, and then 2 spaces across the street in the Ute building. One is upstairs that will house office space for elections, and one is downstairs that will host the publicly facing functions of elections. We wanted to get these under lease early. We have a presidential election coming up next year. The clerk's office is wanting to get settled into their new space as early as possible so that they can focus on those business processes. I'd be happy to answer questions. And John actually did the work on the leases, so he can probably answer more of them than I can.
I have a question. We can pass this ordinance as one. We don't need to do the individual leases? Okay.
Yes.
As we did the last time. And there are no changes to the leases from first read to second read?
Actually, they were already approved by the board on an emergency ordinance.
Oh, this is a confirmatory.
Yeah, this is a confirmatory reading pursuant to the county's home rule charter.
So, I'll let you.
This is a public hearing. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment on these leases? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing for the day and bring this back to the board.
I have a comment.
Patty?
I want to thank staff for their diligence in trying to find not only spaces that worked for this department, but that were more or less affordable in light of the extreme rent prices in the downtown core. I think it's always been a position of the county to keep some county services in the county seat, especially elections. So I really appreciate the effort because I know it wasn't easy, and the timing. I'm glad that we're moving it forward quickly. So, as you said, the clerk can get settled in and gear up for next year's election. So, thank you, John.
Thank you.
I would make a motion to approve the confirmatory reading emergency ordinance approving the 2-year commercial lease agreements with Vectra Bank Colorado N.A. and James E. Koch Living Trust for the purposes of housing the offices of the Pitkin County Clerk and Recorder during the Courthouse Plaza renovation project.
I will second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded to approve the confirmatory reading. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. And do you want to take a 5-minute break while the presentation is set up?
Sounds good.
Good.
Okay. And we have our agenda today is a land use action. The Laux, I believe is the pronunciation, Trust Horseshoe Load Request for Takings Determination. Suzanne?
Thank you, Steve. So the property, the Horseshoe Load, is located up off of Midnight Mine Road, and I don't think our graphics are going to be the greatest, but just if you look above you, just down below here, shows you this is Midnight Mine coming through. You get into the Horseshoe Load. This is this envelope we're talking about that's shown up above. To orient you a little bit in terms of where you are on Midnight Mine Road, you're up past where winter plowing ends, so you've continued up the road there, but you're below the mine, or the mine area site where you cross over. So it's in there where the road is kind of switchbacking up into that gully. And as you can see, there's a big switchback here on the road where you're on the parcel. And then there's, when you move up here, there's an existing road that comes in here into the property. Sorry, my eyes aren't great, so I'm going to put this in front of me as well. It's a little easier for me to see. There's a cabin on the site that was built illegally back in about 1980 and is still there. That's right here where the hand is. That is within the proposed envelope. And if you can see, it's a little hard to pick up, and I tried to do a colored version, but it didn't end up in scanning in. But right here, you can see this line is showing the red zone. So this initial portion of this whole road is within an avalanche red zone. You then cross into this area and all the way through the middle, which is a blue zone. If you look closely at the map, there's some areas in there shown as white zone, which is not a designation we use in the code. It's something that Hal Hartman used in his reports, the avalanche reports. The CGS recommended that that just be considered blue for our purposes. So basically, the blue zone for our review purposes extends from here over to here, encompasses the road and this area. And then again, over here on the other side of this line, you get back into a red zone. So the applicant came in to establish an activity envelope on the property. That was denied by the Community Development Director pursuant to Administrative Decision 58/2015 because portions of the envelope are within red avalanche hazard areas where the code prohibits development. So that includes this initial portion of the road. And it also includes an area they added over here where they had agreed they wouldn't put surface improvements, but they'd asked to include that within the envelope for subsurface improvements such as the wastewater system, so a leach field. Again, since that is within a red zone, our code doesn't distinguish. It says development. We consider even the construction of those subsurface improvements to be development. So basically, the denial was based on those two, the inclusion of those two red zone areas within the envelope. The area on this southern end of the property, or the envelope area, and this portion of the road that comes into the property. This is an existing road. It's, there's clearly old mining activity up in here. So, some portion of this has been there back to mining times. Obviously, when a cabin was built illegally, improvements were made. It's not necessarily clear what all is original pre-existing versus illegally improved. And the assumption is that any replacement of this cabin and construction of a legal one would require potentially some improvements on that road. And again, that would constitute development within that red zone. So again, the denial is based on the development within those two red hazard areas. So the applicant has requested the takings. I think that information is all in your packet. And let's just see if there's anything else I wanted to add. I mentioned the Colorado Geological Survey and the blue versus white zone. And basically, the determination in front of you is whether this denial denies all reasonable use and economic return. And depending on that determination, we would be looking for direction on coming back with a resolution of denial or approval or denial based on that decision. I think that's it. If you have any questions for me.
George?
So Suzanne, looking at, perhaps if I break this up into three different areas, you've got the driveway, you've got the existing cabin, and then you've got an area that is requested for some underground work, like a leach field.
Right.
And so in each of these areas, they were all require some work. The road would require some work to get up to whatever the standards are for rural and remote. And that would not be allowed because that is in the red zone.
Right, basically their whole access is within the red zone. I mean, the reality is a lot of Midnight Mine Road is within, a red zone. But again, right, the denial is based on the assumption by including it within an envelope that there could be development would occur within that envelope, which would not be permitted under the code.
Thanks.
And if it helps, I forgot, I did have these other two graphics where Grafton provided a little more. Again, that just highlights that wastewater, the OWTS area on that one end of the envelope, and then actually this just shows the area in the middle of the envelope that was designated white in the report and is being considered blue. So like I said, the blue zone really extends from this line all the way over to this line. And actually, just to add to that, I mean, again, under the code, we prohibit development in red. We only allow development in blue if there is no alternative location, which is the case here. And then that would be subject to mitigation within the blue zone. So again, in this case, the denial comes because of the additional red areas that are included.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I may have some questions. I'll go back and forth between you, Suzanne, and John. So per our code, as you just stated, if there is no other suitable area for development on the property, development can be allowed in the blue zone. But the request for the activity envelope is not in the blue zone, or is it just because, I mean, I thought you said the activity envelope was near the existing cabin, which they would take down.
The activity envelope is really actually, again, I'll do it on, I think this is just easier to see.
Sure it is.
But it extends, so the driveway continues down here, but this line is the line of the activity envelope that goes all the way through the blue zone, into the red zone, around that area, back, and then on the, runs along the lower side of that driveway as well, all the way out to Midnight Mine Road. So that is the activity envelope that is requested by the applicant. It includes the blue zone in the middle and the red zones on either side.
Would you foresee the possibility that if there was a new application that was entirely different and it had the underground features and the home in a much more limited activity envelope in the blue zone, would that be something that would be permitted? Or they would still have to have the driveway within the red zone?
We still have the issue of the driveway in the red zone. So, I mean, you could, right, eliminate this portion, this area from the envelope, just take that out because it's in the red zone, and limit the envelope to this. But again, then you still have the issue of this portion of the driveway that's in the red zone.
And there's no other conceivable driveway access through the slopes below it. It's just too steep a slope, and it's also in that red zone.
Right. There's really no way to avoid the red zone and right, other constraints.
Okay.
But the driveway is really only a driveway access in the summer months, because in the winter months the road is not plowed up there. So you can't differ. I mean, there's snowmobiles that go up and down throughout that whole area, but because this is not a winter accessible driveway, does that make any difference?
It doesn't. I mean, again, under the code, our language just says development is prohibited in a red zone.
Yeah.
Like I said, obviously, the red zone is there along much of, Midnight Mine Road. I mean, it's an issue long before you get to this driveway, but technically we're establishing an envelope within that red zone.
Yeah, because sometimes people do snowmobile to winter use cabins and have snowmobile parties. And so if this is in the red zone, you could very easily trigger an avalanche.
Oh, no, I agree, but there are snowmobiles that go all the way up and down the Midnight Mine Road through red zone areas.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Well, Castle Creek is a red zone area. I mean, most of Castle Creek and upper portions of Maroon Creek. So when we have those already established county roads, if we were to go back and revisit it, but those roads and accesses were done prior to our red code, blue code, red zone, blue zone code. So that's the problem. But George, you're right. We're still allowing access into red zone areas, but that's access that's been allowed prior to the establishment of this code issue.
Okay. My other question was, this being a property in the rural remote zone district would be eligible for 1 TDR?
That's correct.
And so my understanding of the standard of a takings is that you have denied all reasonable use of the property?
Correct.
And
All
so-
reasonable.
All reasonable. And so would a ability to take a TDR off the property and sterilize it and receive the monetary value of a TDR constitute reasonable use?
That is a complicated question.
That's why I asked you.
That's why I'm
Well-
sitting in the middle.
And the answer is kind of complicated, too. I'm not sure if the board wants to get into that right now or perhaps later during an executive session. The process that led to the development of constrained lot TDRs, which is basically what you're talking about, started a number of years ago. And since that had been incorporated within the land use code, there have been some nuanced changes in judicial interpretation of the takings clause, which might inform the BOCC as to what direction you want to go to in considering the severance of a TDR from the property as representing a beneficial use. So I would advise the board that if we get into that discussion, it would probably be more in the realm of an executive session.
Okay, thank you. I don't know where we would do this in our temporary building, but I may call for that as we continue the conversation. Then what is the size and the details around a cabin that would be allowed in the rural and remote zone district?
1,000 square feet. You are allowed an additional sort of mechanical building separate of 160 square feet. But yeah, that's the basic.
And no extension of utilities, no
Correct.
extension of services, as I
Correct.
understand it. Then another question back for John. We have two different numbers that are presented in this. There was a warranty deed that showed document fees of $7.50, which suggests a sales price of $75,000 originally for the parcel. And then there is a contingency contract as represented by Mr. Grafton that is for $300 and some odd thousand if they're allowed to develop in the red zones. Where in between those two would you determine a takings value? Is it the 79 price plus inflation, or the current price, or
Definitely in between the two, probably.
somewhere in between the two?
Typically speaking, a conditional contract or a contract that has not closed yet is not considered as evidence of value simply because it
Hasn't
hasn't closed. Likewise, the earlier transaction is considerably dated, and so looking at 75,000 is not particularly reasonable either. And the language that staff uses in the memo is correct in that it seems to reflect the value of $75,000 simply because you never know if there was other consideration in addition to cash that would have established the documentary fee for the recordation of the deed beyond that $75,000. But given the lapse of time, it's
Yeah.
just not a good true value of the property either.
Sure. And then looking at this, if it were to be, if a takings determination was made, then that opens the door for the board to determine appropriate relaxation of the county's standards, potentially?
Not necessarily
or-
a relaxation of the standard because the code would stay as it is. So the standards would stay as they are. But the code does allow then the BOCC to consider whether or not a remediation of that taking is appropriate, which would allow development to occur with whatever conditions or restrictions the board deems to be appropriate given the physical status of the and situation of the property itself.
Okay, and so now this is even more hypothetical question. You know, looking at the difficulty of the site in the red avalanche zones surrounding it, and knowing that public safety and general welfare is certainly one of our prominent concerns, if a takings determination did happen and then a remediation plan was going to be developed, I would imagine it would be avalanche walls, you know, the type of things we've seen surrounding homes before to make sure they wouldn't be flattened or have been suggested in other cases. It's not really a rockfall area. We're not seeing that, but we are seeing the avalanche threat. Would the cost of remediation be factored into determining value if a takings, you know, so if we would develop, yeah, we paid this and lots worth this, but we're going to spend $300,000-$400,000 on, you know, a wall, reinforced walls, reinforced windows, reinforced everything. Would that come off of what would be the price of, as if it was a payout?
A appropriately conducted appraisal from the true value of the property would not only consider what the anticipated transaction might realize for a seller, given the you know, the various attributes to the property, but would also or should also consider the costs of development of the property, such that if you had a house on this particular piece of land and considering other transactions that were similar or that could be distinguished to arrive at a value of this property as developed, then you would quite naturally look at, well, what's it cost to develop it? So if other properties in the area are selling for $500,000, but it costs $1 million to develop, then the likelihood of development seems to go, you know, away. So, but certainly the cost associated with development, which in part would not only be reflective of the actual physical work that would have to be done on the site to prep it for development, but the cost associated with any of the appropriate remediation required by the BOCC and conditions. And I wouldn't try to anticipate what the board might pick, whether it's a deflection berm or who knows what. But certainly that should be factored into the value of the property.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is just to kind of re-clarify that if there is a takings determination and then the site comes back for remediation and determined by the county, similar to perhaps some that we've seen in Old Snowmass or other areas, it could be a determination of the board that because it's a hazard area and to reduce the hazard, it should only be a 500 square foot structure and not a 1,000 square foot structure. So it would sleep less and require a smaller leach field and so on and so forth. That is a potential remediation action the board could take, type of remediation action the board could take.
Correct. Reduction of size is one of the many things that the board can consider in determining what the appropriate remediation for a takings, if the board determines a taking has occurred by the administrative denial. All that you would have to do is relate the size of the structure to the hazard that's on the property, and that the reduction in size would actually reduce the hazard present or exposure.
And one last one, I guess, within the range of considerations of trying to allow development to proceed, but still taking the safety hazards into consideration, it could be something the board, or could it be something that the board could say, well, you have to park at the end of this driveway, and that there is no true driveway. You can have a footpath or a walkway in to the residence, but to reduce the danger of the cars being covered or people in the cars being covered in the length of that red zone, you could require the parking to be a little more remote than immediately adjacent to the house? Possibly.
The possible considerations for the board in developing the appropriate parameters for development of the site are almost without limitation, provided they relate to a hazard that's been identified. So if the hazard is reduced by having parking someplace else, then that would be an appropriate action.
Thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, I want to tag on to what George was saying too, though, about all the other activity that goes on up there in a red zone in the winter. And this is another one for you, John. Could we then limit the use of this facility to just summer?
Potentially.
Okay, and in light of Rachel's comment about parking, I would still be concerned about public safety walking through a red zone to access the property. The other concern I would have would be the impact of mitigation if we were to require any kind of retaining walls. We know what happened to that other property up by Conundrum, I believe, Lance. I'm going to look at you, where we required a pretty massive avalanche protection wall that was pretty aesthetically impactive to the view plane, to the neighbors, to that little community. And we need to take that into consideration if we were to move forward and ask for a mitigation in a red zone for avalanches of retaining walls in a rural remote area. That's pretty impactive development. I think Rachel's question as to TDR and how that affects the denial of all reasonable use and economic return on the property is a good question and something we might need to have answered in how we move forward.
Suzanne, what's the approximate size of the existing cabin?
It's about 400, 500 square feet, I think, no bigger than that.
And would the applicant be allowed to continue using that cabin just as it is now and not do any land use proposal?
Well, we were aware of it. They applied back in 1981 to come through the process, and we identified it then as illegal. I'm fairly unclear from records I've been able to find why, once they were not approved through a 1041, it doesn't seem, obviously, we never went back and made them remove that structure. So it's been there illegally for 30 plus years now. I mean, if they, so no, I think, I would hope we wouldn't, I guess, continue that now into the future with an illegal structure up there. And the structure itself, I mean, obviously anything, if an approval is granted to develop here, we'll have to go through permitting and meet current building code standards. So, yeah, that's.
Now, was it actually illegal when it was built in 1980?
Yes, they did not obtain land use approval or a building permit for it. And both of those were required at the time.
At that time?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess this is a question for John, since they did make attempt in 1981 to make it legal, and it was perhaps improperly dealt with at that time.
I wouldn't infer that it was improperly dealt with. It was denied.
Denied.
Actually, I need to step in here somewhere because we're getting off. We're making assumptions here that aren't correct.
Okay, and actually maybe we're at the point we need to let you do your whole presentation, everything that you want. And you might answer my questions in that.
I had to answer some of those questions.
Okay.
It's up to the chair. Make sure you answer stuff. So.
Yeah. We usually do staff questions to staff.
Yeah, I thought it was a question more appropriate for Suzanne and John at this point. It wasn't denied, it was withdrawn. So.
Okay.
So it was denied in 1981.
It wasn't denied.
What Grafton is clarifying, it was not denied, it was withdrawn.
Withdrawn, okay.
At the time, so it did not proceed.
Okay.
But Steve, the fact still stands that there were no permits or land use approvals for that structure at any time.
Okay. Any further questions for staff? Okay, now we'll give the floor to you to do your whole presentation, whatever issues you want to talk about.
I'm Grafton Smith, land planner representing Ms. Laux. And I apologize for that, but I didn't want to get down, get so far down a road that I had a lot of work to get back up it. just to kind of maybe flesh out, well, first of all, let me introduce Hal Hartman. He is the he was the avalanche expert that on this. I think he did a very, very good job, and I'm very, very detailed. I'm very impressed with his work. Because on the other hand, I had, well, let me just start over again and give some history of the property. Is that Mr. John Locks bought the property from Ed Smart in 1979. Ed had purchased it just earlier that year from Little Annie's Corporation, Dave Farney. So there's so John and his wife Lorena. She's from Costa Rica. They lived there in the winter times. And his idea was to build a small cabin and, a small retreat in the mountains that they could come up and spend their summers up here as opposed to down there. He built the cabin and then came to the conclusion it probably should be legalized, and so he hired an Aspen attorney, and they came through to legalize the cabin in '81. The county attorney brought to their attention the fact that or made a point that the sale between Little Annie and Ed Smart had taken place after March of 1979, which meant that the definition of subdivision, it got to do with merger and a very complicated issue. And in the light of that, the attorneys couldn't figure out a way around. Couldn't figure, how to deal with that whole issue. And so, and they'd come through with a fairly concise application. They had reports from Nick Lampierce on rockfall, which there was none, and the avalanches and all that stuff. And they had pulled a well permit. There's a well permit dating from this time for the property. He had, as I recall the file, he had reports from environmental health with regards to a leach field, et cetera, et cetera. He had a fairly concise, what I could consider a decent application, but having faced with the feedback that that whole subdivision definition thing was being applied to them, they just basically threw their hands up and stopped pursuing it. Later, it was realized. In fact, just when we started our application, and we wouldn't have filed an application in the face of that either. But it turned out is that the actual what everybody was looking at was the recording date on the document, which was after the date of the ordinance, the subdivision ordinance. But actually the deed was signed, the actual transfer of the property took place in February, which was prior to it, and therefore wasn't subject to that. So that's when we figured that out. Then that's when we filed our application. Had someone, perhaps done a little more work in 1980, then we wouldn't be here now, because it would have been legalized at that point. Because the only thing that's got this thing, this creating an issue, is the avalanche hazard. Everything else seems to be fine. The thing that really caused me the most confusion within the dealing with the land use code on this is that there is a section that says that if you can't, if you're stuck and you let me rephrase that. There is provisions in the land use code that contemplates development in red zones there, but you can't get there through. The only way through it is to accuse or is to apply for a denial, for an appeal of a denial. And in it, there is a whole code section that says, if you're denied unfairly, then you can appeal, and under the appeal, here's the whole set of, of ways that you mitigate. I mean, I don't even know how to put it into English. But yet, the only way you can get to that section that lists what's right here, it's 720, 50, yeah. It says go to section 3, and then there's a whole mitigation standards. And that's the part that caused me the greatest amount of confusion as to the county contemplates and allows for, and I mean allowed for in its land use code, development in what we call red zones, but yet not a way to get to it except by going through a takings.
Right.
And I found that a bit crazy. The cabin, I don't know exactly when, but I would say for at least a good 10, 15, 20 years has been inhabited. The person has not been paying rent. He's more along the lines of what I would call a squatter, but almost continually year-round. There are plenty of examples of other habitation up there. I mean, this is obviously not the only cabin up there. There are huge houses down the road that have retainage walls that deal with mitigation. So there's plenty of houses below. Well, there's plenty. There's a number of houses below us that have been constructed that required mitigation. I guess there's so many things. I'm just trying to figure which one to pick up now. There was the mention of the road. The driveway into the property is probably such you wouldn't need to improve it in order to develop the road. It's very, I mean, I have a Yukon, and in the summertime, I drive in, turn around, drive back out again. So I can't imagine that it would need to be improved, widened or developed. It actually is a vestige of an old. In fact, behind the cabin, I made mention in my takings letter, is that it really was part of an older road that went through the property and goes up to. There's two settling ponds. The one. Old settling ponds. There's one that's in front of the cabin, which is the big flat area. There's another one above the cabin and both of these were accessed off this old log, mining road. And I don't know when, but it's probably in combination of the 1980 improvements that the driveway was probably, the old driveway was cleaned up. Let's see what else. So I don't know that, in the issuance of a TDR, I don't know if there's, as far as preservation goes, there's anything to be gained here. I mean, this site has seen historic use since arguably 1890-something. The cabin's been there since, and been used since for the last 30, 35 years. Improvements to the road, obviously to Midnight Mine Road, especially given that it's winter improved, and the county will plow it, and the county maintains it in the summertime, and in the wintertime, which is the only time the avalanche issue even raises its head, it's all snowmobile access. What other thing was raised? With regards to the activity envelope next to the cabin, the red area there that we were identifying as subsurface use only. And if you want to, you can ask, feel free to ask Hal any questions you have, but an avalanche is basically a surface entity. I mean, it doesn't affect anything subsurface. And so putting a utility, you would think that a septic field would be a natural use for a red zone. I think Hal can speak to it in greater detail, but there's plenty of other instances in Colorado State where subsurface things are put into red zones. And actually, in my original application, I made the argument that what determines a red zone or a blue zone, and then we used white zone just to determine, there was no avalanche impact there. The only difference was the pressures that a structure would realize from a potential event, and so those. And actually, there's a vertical component to that. So if you had a 30-foot high pole and a 20-foot avalanche came in, the top of the pole wouldn't exhibit. Given that the avalanche would be a surface event, in theory, below the surface, those pressures that would be realized are zero. And therefore, the red zone could extend just down to the surface of the ground, but below that, because there's no pressures realized there, that's actually a white zone, and so I made that argument in my application. It was stretching it a little bit, I think, but I think it's a viable, and actually, I think it was a viable point. And also, the county, in its own land use code, in that same mitigation section, contemplates that and actually directs people that if you have to put utilities in a red zone, I think they were talking about whatever, they have to be below grade. They have to be below ground. So the county already in its land use code contemplates development in red zones. In its land zone, and it contemplates if you're going to put a utility in a red zone, it needs to be below ground. And it contemplates that if you have a driveway crossing a red zone, it needs to be properly mitigated against. But all of that's subject to engineering, and so I guess there's degrees of red zones. So what you have to do, and actually I'm starting to get out of, well, in fact, for some time here I've been out of my field of expertise, basically rehashing my time at talking to Hal. But that's where you have the avalanche expert come in, calculate what the pressures would be, and then offer appropriate mitigation to those pressures. Obviously, below ground there are zero, so there is no mitigation. So I would think that, and then get back to this white zone blue thing here. In Hal's calculations of the pressures that would be realized by whatever the avalanche potential is there, he calculated that anything within this, if you look behind you in this area that's the blue, anything that you built in there wouldn't realize any pressures that would be significant against which you would have to mitigate. Now, when we had the Colorado Geo Survey people came up, and they took a look at it, their recommendations were they agreed with pretty much everything else, but they departed from Hal's findings in that they said that they would like anything built in that, what we called our white area, be engineered and mitigated against. And so in order to reconcile the two reports in the easiest way, as opposed to sitting back and having to do all the recalculations over again and getting into all of the cost, and it was just as easy to just concede. And so I'll tell you what, we'll just stipulate to that we will have that engineered. Now, we don't think there's any danger in that because when the engineer calculates the pressures and takes them, the mitigations in that area won't be that significant. In fact, in almost our entire activity envelope in which habitation will take place, parking and all of that stuff, is all within a blue area in which development can take place. The only reason we got to a takings is the fact of this driveway, and so I'll, which I think presents at least a minimal impact. So anyways, I stammered and stumbled because I think to a certain extent I'm a bit intimidated by, first, I haven't been in front of you guys for a while, and second is all of this new technology on grandeur. I'm kind of used to the low ceiling and the dark room and
hiding behind the pillar.
Hiding behind the pillar. So I'm a better counter puncher. So please ask questions.
Okay, Patty and then George.
Yeah, I have a question. Is there any other, if you look at this bigger map that we have, it's pretty significant, I mean, the claim itself. Is there any other area on this claim at all that's, we don't know if it's applicable for development, if it would be approved? Because the activity envelope in the site we're looking at is way at the far corner of the claim.
No, it's all.
So all the rest of it, okay. Because it's hard to tell on a flat map.
It's all either a combination of red zone, or even from a practical standpoint. I mean, first off, you've got this big flat, and what set that red zone that I've got stipulated for subsurface use only.
Right.
Those lines are set by, there's a stream that goes out around the property, and those lines were set in respect of the 100-foot setback from the stream, which is actually on the neighbor's parcel, and then comes around and cuts through the corner.
Yeah, I just want to know if there's anything else on the property. And as far as subsurface utilities, I can understand that, but there's also an issue for me anyway that if the septic was to be in need of service during the winter, then you'd have people out there on that area. And our concern really, and my concern, is the protection of public safety, human health issues with people crossing red zones, driving through red zones, service people, anybody, visitors, guests, the pizza delivery man, whatever it would be, crossing a red zone or having to work in a red zone for utilities. And as far as the blue area, yeah, you can remediate in a blue zone, but the red zone is a little stickier. So I'll let the rest of the board, and then I think we might have some questions for the attorney.
George?
I'd like to see pizza delivery up there in the wintertime.
Those Domino guys
Call
don't go
Domino's.
anywhere.
Big enough tip.
It's Timmy, my cousin.
Suzanne, I just want to clarify, because I heard two different things. I heard Grafton say that our code allows development in red zones, and I heard you say our code does not allow development in red zones. I want to clarify that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So yeah, the code, the basic standard is we prohibit development in a red zone. We allow development in a blue zone only if there's no alternative. So in this case, there's the blue zone where we can permit development subject to mitigation. The red zone takes it that step farther. The code provides standards if you are denied and subsequently approved through a takings. Then there are standards put out there for mitigation within the red zone. So that's, I think, some of the things that Grafton is referring to. It's similar to other provisions in our code, wildlife habitat areas, where we prohibit development, but we say, but if there is no alternative and we end up approving development there, then you should be subject to these additional standards. So that's the difference.
Okay, and then the other question, I don't know whether you can answer this, it may be more of a question for environmental health, but if you were to have a leach field or septic in a red zone where you know that it's going to be avalanche prone, and if avalanches come down and leave substantial snow pack on that leach field or septic, would that lead to the failure of that septic or leach field down the road?
I can't answer that, but it's something we could run through environmental health.
Okay.
It's a good thought.
Rachel?
Yeah, I actually had that same question. It would seem that if there was enough snowpack that it didn't melt off June, July, and no chance for the perking to occur in the ground, it seems like that could be problematic. I just kind of wanted to go back. George asked the question I want to on the red zone, so I appreciate your clarification on that. And I just want to comment that, you know, there may be a driveway that was roughed out and usable for an unpermitted illegal cabin. But once it goes through the process of being permitted and a new structure, that road is going to have to come up to county standards. So even if it's, quote, drivable today, it doesn't mean that work wouldn't have to occur on that and potential mitigation across the length of that driveway from being in that area. So, you know, I also kind of want to emphasize, which Suzanne can correct me if I'm wrong, but the code that lists potential allowances for takings in the red zone lot, it's not a limited list. It's not saying these are your remedies and this is what this board would have to do. As we discussed, that's just a range of potential things that would then be allowed. It still could be a determination when we look at it more carefully at a separate hearing, if a takings is determined to have occurred, what the appropriate remediation could be. And that could be summer use only, that could be a smaller house-sized structure, that could be you know, a number of different measures, having the safety wall the length of the driveway, or at least portions of the driveway, a shelter to run to, that sort of thing. So I want to make sure the applicants are clear on that. It seems the direction is that you would like to get a takings determination to go forward with the project roughly as planned. And you might get a takings determination and then mitigation conditions that are very different from the project you have planned. So I want to make sure that that's clear.
Grafton, looking at the map, is there, I presume that the plan, your plan would be to build a new structure in what shows as blue on the map. There's kind of a wide flat area there. Is that correct?
Well, I think that that would be, in fact, these mitigations, I think that would be something that would be addressed at a site plan. You know, we're doing this, we're just trying to establish an activity envelope. I think that the natural place to build it, in fact, had this discussion with Hal, would be, you can see the current location of the cabin, would be to move it, is to build a cabin just as, you can see this oval, the slight oval.
Why don't you use the cursor on it?
Sure. That says propane tank or something?
Yeah, right there. Is to build in the area of the propane tank just like this, and then also, and to build it so that it, so that's, right now it's about a foot off the ground. You know, the level of the house is about a foot above grade, and to bring it back to where the area where the propane tank is, so that you're building off of the probably the second or third topographic line, so you're building it 3 or 4 feet. So the front is 3 or 4 feet. That would be almost would also serve as a mitigation to the impacts. In fact, I'd really like Hal to step in on that one, because because there's a component of the pressures that if well, first of all, the site hasn't seen an avalanche, and you know this, we're having to deal with 100-year events. Okay, and so, but the in the event of your 100-year event, it would come down, and I think there's going to be some. See where it says dam there? There's a line there. There's actually a berm that was built to construct to be part of the settling pond. Historically, there's a berm. There's trees, you know, so it's been there quite a while. Is that there's some kickback from the avalanche from that. and that if you built the house higher than higher off the ground than the cabin is certainly, I mean, the front edge of it is, that it would mitigate. But Hal, please save me.
If you would like to call your expert during your presentation, you're
okay, sure,
welcome
for sure.
to.
Steve, before you go on, can I just clarify Steve's question? If you look at the map, the cabin as put on this map, the activity envelope plan, shows the cabin within the blue zone at the corner of the red zone. The deck of the cabin, as shown on this, is actually in the activity envelope that's the hatch marked that would be part of the red zone. So, so you do have the deck in the red. But the blue on your drawing is very clear. I mean, the cabin site on your drawing is not in the red. See, it's in the corner of the blue. That blue on there is actually the white zone that we changed to blue because Hal had labeled it white when we don't have a white, so that's why it's blue.
Sure.
Aside for the deck projecting into the red.
Now, understand that this is existing conditions and not a site plan application. And obviously that we would not make the argument that a deck can exist in, deck, the deck would have to go. And so that would be, that plus the mitigations, the appropriate place for all that stuff to show up is in a site plan.
Now, one more question for you, Grafton, and then let's get Hal up there. And
John has a point.
John,
go ahead, Steve. You can.
Is it, since we haven't been to the site, but you have, is it possible to put the cabin and the septic system all in the blue zone and not in the red zone at all?
Without sizing it, without going through the calculations that you would do it in anticipation of a site plan application, I don't know. Given that there are scenarios that perhaps you could do some sort of engineered where you have a minimal leach field or not have one at all, and so but I thought at this level of inquiry that is to just give as much wiggle room to the application as I could, I included an area because that's the natural place to try to put it. Otherwise, you are probably going to put, you'll be putting small bits of it in areas where you have steep slopes. And so you're, 6 to 1, half dozen the other, but the most convenient place to put it. And I felt, given the argument I made about subsurface, that probably the most appropriate place and probably the least impactful place is to put it there. And the limitations on the size that I put on it were basically external in that those lines are determined by the setback from the nearby stream more so than actually that's the size of the leach field area I need in order to accomplish this. We haven't, didn't want to get into that kind of level of inquiry with an expert or doing whatever.
I know you'd have to get a septic engineer.
Yeah, then you have to size the house, and like I say, we're not contemplating a site plan application at all. In fact, probably would leave that to a future owner.
Mm-hmm. Okay, John?
Steve, for the purpose of the record, it's not clear if this, I guess it's a survey that's up on the display panel and is in the packet, if this represents, and particularly in reference to the dam, cabin, and propane tank that are represented on the drawing, if those are existing structures and features, or if those are features that are part of the request.
No, this is not a site plan application. This survey is purely based on
existing.
An improvement survey.
Okay.
And everything is laid on top of the improvement survey.
So can I clarify? So this drawing would then be where the existing illegal cabin is and the legal deck. Is that what I'm then to assume?
That's the existing cabin on this survey.
Right.
Yeah, that's the existing cabin, yeah. And there is a deck in front of
That one happens to
it.
be in the deck that happens to be in the propane tank that happens to be.
Yeah. And that, in answer to the previous question, is that the location would be moved. I mean, I can't contemplate.
That's okay. Yeah, we just need a deck. That's a good point.
At a minimum, they would have to move the cabin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to
Hal
invite
come up and
Hal
answer questions?
to weigh in, and he might be able to explain some of the work he did and some of the findings he's come up with. Hal has been very generous in his time. He actually has spent additional time because because the modeling that he has been using is the big Swiss model that everybody uses, and that's been developing. So there's some new stuff with that. So, anyways, Hal. Oops.
I have to wire him.
So maybe.
How can I help you? What question can I
Well,
address?
just identify yourself for the record first, but you're actually to augment Grafton's comments further.
Thank
You're
you.
part of his presentation.
My name's Hal Hartman. I'm an applied physicist, and I'm an employee of SPH Works. And this is a product of my work, the avalanche hazard zoning at the Horseshoe. And one comment I'd like to make is the dam is in feet, about 4 feet in elevation. The propane tank sits 4 feet below the access road, for example. So it's kind of sitting down in a hole, the dam and the cabin. And one mitigating measure that I mentioned to
Take that away.
Grafton is that any future structure would have to be at an elevation equal to the highest elevation along the existing dam. And that's just a matter of fluid dynamics. We'd rather have the debris flow over the dam and the cabin at that elevation so that there's no material backing up and kind of creeping onto the deck or creeping into the door and that kind of thing.
Patty?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Hal's work from years ago, and I've read it thoroughly again, and as always, it's really good. And I don't have any questions, actually, as far as his designated. I'm glad we clarified the blue zone, white zone, but as to his clarifications of the red zone areas and the avalanche issues and concerns.
Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. Your work was key to a 100-year avalanche event. Is that correct?
As written in your code, 100 years.
Yes, thank you. And what I'm wondering is what are the type of pressures or magnitude, depth of avalanche would be expected in a 100-year event on this site?
It's a good question. And when the GEO people came back with their comments of my work and the questions that they raised, which were all excellent, and I apologize to them for missing it, or at least not addressing their questions in my report. I went directly to the best minds in the world to make sure that I hadn't missed something in my analysis, because I certainly wouldn't want to put somebody, in a risky situation. It turns out that my work is real conservative, and there were 4 topics that were brought up and debated amongst my colleagues in Europe. The first one was the joint probability of avalanching. In my report, I assumed that 4 release zones could release simultaneously, and I applied a very high probability to that occurrence, when in fact I should have used a much lower occurrence. That had a direct impact on volume. The second item that was brought up was my assessment of forest structure. The GEO guy suggested that I completely denude the landscape and run the modeling, which I did. He just didn't understand that part of the report. But I was called out on that because forest structure is a very important aspect in retarding avalanches. And so that led to a little longer run out than would be expected today. And the third and fourth points are something that no one brought up but myself, and that's that the real problem to this site is wet slab avalanching. The GEO guy never even mentioned it. It's a south slope. Our models all depict dry flow. I went to the Swiss and asked them to model the wet flow, because wet flow avalanches flow farther. And it turns out that the types of height and depth, Rachel, in this area will be on the order of several meters at its central point, 6 to 7 feet, and that's beyond the activity envelope as Grafton has noted. Flow velocities through there are very slow because the avalanche is reaching flat ground where particle lockup occurs, so it's decelerating rapidly. And the final point that I went to the Swiss on was that the geo guy wanted to explore the dust cloud situation. It turns out that the most advanced models in the world are now available to a limited set of people, and the dust cloud is tightly coupled to the moving debris, and that the dust cloud would not affect the cabin as it is today, shown here, and certainly not if we were considering a cabin located on top of the propane tank as shown. So small debris on that side, nothing earth-shattering. Regarding the road into the property, once again, my measurements were very conservative, and it just barely qualifies as a red zone. Flow height, 4 feet maybe.
And what sort of recommendations for reinforcement of the structure, beyond standard building codes were made by the geo folks you talked about?
Well, that's interesting. The geo folks claim it's blue, but they don't have any numbers to support it.
Okay.
So if something takes on a blue hazard, what is the impact pressure? What is the flow height? I mean, see, as an entrepreneur, I'm unable to go to my client and say that's a blue hazard zone and have no numbers for them. What do I tell the engineer? That's why it's white. I don't have any numbers for the guy. Well, what do I tell him? My dust cloud assessment was on the order of 3/4 of a kilopascal. The SLF measurements were 1/3 of that. In our building code, we have to build for winds of 100, 120 miles per hour at this elevation. That's a much greater force than the dust cloud would exert on this structure. So I don't have any real numbers for somebody building in what's now a blue zone. So I don't know. I guess we have to go to the geo guy to ask him, what is the impact pressure, what is the flow height, and what is the velocity?
Can I just tag on to that? Your description of your analysis without the vegetation, which was more conservative, which I appreciate because that's how I think it should be, because you can't value, the avalanche on the slope isn't going to change, but the vegetation could. Wildfire could come through, bark beetle could come through, anything can come through and devastate that vegetation. So then we would have to reevaluate the red zone without vegetation. So I appreciate the conservative approach to that.
I guess I'm just a little curious, and I don't know if this is for Suzanne or you or what now, but given that there are no numbers related to pressure or depth, how would we then as a board determine what the appropriate mediation is? Would we require that information to be sussed out a little more fully?
It's an issue at, if you approve an activity envelope, the conditions are going to say, at site plan, when somebody has designed a structure, they will also be, then have to demonstrate what appropriate mitigation is for that structure, where it is.
And why.
So that's really in our process when you get into that deeper detail.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, just to clarification, what I think, and Hal, correctly if I'm wrong, but when you say you have no number for anything, it's not that it doesn't have a number, just the number 0. I mean, there are no pressures. In other words, when he calculates the pressure, the number comes up 0. He doesn't have like, X, Y, or Z. It's just, there are no, that's what he determined as being the right zone. There was nothing there to mitigate. And
That's correct. The white, again, in the PitkinCounty code, there's no allowance for, an avalanche-free zone inside of the horseshoe load. So if you go to literature worldwide, actually a white hazard zone is very common. It's found throughout Europe and Canada. And it just says that the impact pressures there are less than 3 kilopascals, which is the case here. A dust cloud from an avalanche may hit that site and exert a half to maybe 1 kilopascal, 1.5 kilopascals, which is a minimal force. It's less than a 100-mile-an-hour wind.
Hal, on page 14 of your report, it shows 2 different general avalanche run-out chutes that go down on either side of the cabin. Is there some, I don't know if you have that on a slide, Suzanne, and it's on page 14 of Hal's report.
I could dig into the website and find it for you, but it might take me longer than...
Well, I was just curious. It seems like the avalanche, the potential avalanche splits and goes around either side of this area. Is there like a topographical feature or something that diverts snow from this, what you call the white zone?
That's correct. I went to PitkinCounty and acquired their digital elevation model. And in this example, as I point out in the report, I've treated the landscape as if it's totally denuded. There's not a tree on it. So the question is, will terrain steer the avalanche? The answer is yes. It steers it away, or it acts as a splitting wedge, if you will. And so the cabin, and that's what gave rise to the white zone. There's just no physical way for an avalanche to impact what I called the white zone with dense flow debris. At least according to the digital elevation model and the way RAMS interfaces with that.
George?
So that white zone that you referred to, Hal, Suzanne, you've got that enclosed with the blue zone?
Right. I mean, what you're looking at up there that's showing as blue is what in Hal's report was the actual white zone in the middle.
Okay.
And it's surrounded by a blue zone on either side and then red zones out beyond that.
All right, and so that really supports your earlier comments, Suzanne, that if we were to look at a site development area, it would be within that blue zone, because once you get outside that blue zone, then you get into red zones on either side.
Right. So basically, right. From here all the way over here, within a blue zone under our code. And again, I think to that point about the site plan, once they've looked at where do we actually want to put a cabin, then they're coming back and saying, well, tell me what it is I need to address pressure-wise. And Hal's going to say, if it's here, this is the pressure I'm finding. If it's there, these are the pressures I'm finding, and they will design based on that.
But then that still leads the issue of at least their inquiry about putting a leach field or septic off into the red zone, and we don't know, as Rachel also said, what the percolation would be and how that would impact that leach field if it was in the red zone, and then on the other side, then you still have the driveway, and there's ways that we could look at mitigating that, as Patty has suggested. So there's ways to do that. I guess I'm a little confused in terms of where we're at right now. Are you looking for us to provide some suggestions to determine if this? Do we need to say this is a takings, and if it is a takings, then it will come back to us, or we could approve. We can't, or we could approve what's currently in the application.
Well, this is the first step with the takings process. You have to determine if the denial is a taking or not. That's what you decide today. Based on that, you either direct staff to come back with a remediation, remediating it by allowing development, or a resolution allowing some other form of remediation. But so the initial decision today is this denial a taking, and then what is your directed next step for that?
I just need to clarify, George, this blue-white stuff. Are you saying that it might make better sense? That blue area up there is really what Hal determined was white. Is that correct?
But our code determines.
Well, I know, but I just want, and so he's saying that there's a split of the avalanches because of topography, there's less pressure there, that's why therefore he would determine it to be white. So were you saying that that might be a better place to put the development is in this white zone that's really blue?
Well, that seems like that would be the only place to put the development.
Okay, that's why I wanted to clarify that was.
And I think Hal's report.
Yeah, that's what you were saying.
Leads to that conclusion.
The reason, and maybe I should have made that a different color, but because actually the blue zone, as we established it in the land use code, actually goes from where the arrow is
I understand.
All the way over there.
Yeah, I understand the parameters of that.
The only reason for this example, because it was actually less of an exhibit to the board as it was to Suzanne, as a method of reconciling Hal's already conservative report with what came back from the Colorado survey people. And because all it does is say, okay, in that area, to engineer, as opposed to not engineer, that we would concede in order to, basically I'm conceding and marrying the two reports together to create the best possible and the most approvable application. And so I conceded to that.
Right, okay. I just wanted to clarify George's point, but wait, one more other thing. In light of Rachel's question about a TDR and the determination of takings and the legal nature of that, we might need a place in this building where we could have an exec session.
Right.
Oh, you're so good.
Where you have a
the kitchen,
semi-appropriate location, yeah.
or the restroom, or
Stall.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, and it's mostly because of the evidence that's really been introduced in this hearing that there is the white zone that so I guess I would be less inclined to look at the white zone as being the same as the blue zones. Because if what we're saying through your expert is that the white zone is the safest zone of all, that it is a hair safer than, or more, than what we have mapped as blue zones, I would see forcing that activity envelope and building into the white zone as opposed to saying, well, the white and the blue are equal, and we'll just make the white into a blue zone. I think that is expanding the area, and to, again, when it comes back to us for remediation, it might not be the application as you had submitted it, but looking at the flow of the avalanches in the chart and the creation of this white zone area, which I would suggest we look at in our code. Should we start to have a white zone as well as a blue zone and a red zone? But so I would not go the route of saying, okay, the white zone is as dangerous as the blue zones, and it's the white zone is the safest zone.
But I just want to clarify, when the Colorado Geological Survey reviewed Hal's report, just to be very specific, their comment, which is why they've opted to take the white and call it blue, is that, in my opinion, so this is Ethan Green with the CAIC's writing, in my opinion, the conclusions of the report are not supported by the information presented within it. My recommendation is that the report be amended to address the following concerns, which then continue on for the next 2 pages, or to remove the area of white avalanche hazard from the plan, leaving the entire area in the red and blue categories. So that was basically the option for the applicant, was to accept that if we call this blue, potentially requiring mitigation, which again would be determined when we have something more specific to work with, or to provide additional analysis to support the white. I mean, that's my reading of that. And so they said, well, we feel like we've done a very complete report, very conservative, but for purposes of moving this forward through this process, we're willing to call this blue, call that entire swath blue with red on the outsides. And again, that would be addressed in a more detailed manner if this makes it to a site plan somewhere down the line.
If we were looking at a site plan and an activity envelope was provided that was essentially the new combined white and blue zones as one big blue zone, Would we have the ability to say where within that larger blue zone that structure could go, or would they have the right to put it anywhere within that blue zone, which, other than slope issues?
Again, for us, an activity envelope defines where any development may occur through.
And we can modify their
through your
requests, though.
remediation, could you make that more specific within that envelope? I don't see.
Or modify the size of the envelope itself or something. Okay, thank you.
So Steve, in light of all the red-blue talk, in light of all the blue-white talk, I think the concern for me is access through a red zone. I've always been adamant about the public safety issues, again, even the Domino Pizza delivery guy, having to access through a red zone. So I think that we cannot forget that. Whether we're talking blue-white, it's really the red that is of concern as far as the takings.
Well, that's kind of my take on it too. I think a house and septic system could be located in a place with very little danger that could be easily mitigated. The Midnight Mine Road itself goes through red avalanche zones. And question for Suzanne, are there other people up above who have houses further up the road who access them in the wintertime? And they're crossing red avalanche zones to get on County Road to get to their property.
Yeah, but Steve, the issue is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we're talking about new development crossing a red zone. We're not talking about people using Midnight Mine Road, which we've all admitted over the years is in a red zone. So we have to focus, I think, on allowing access through a red zone for a takings or not a takings.
And then, following up on that, a question for John. Would we have any liability if someone were injured or killed in an avalanche going to an approved house that we or previous commissioners had approved? They're going on a county road, they're hit by an avalanche. Does the county have any liability in that matter?
Travel on a county road that is impacted by an avalanche event or a rockfall event would not generate liability for the county. The county is not a guarantor of safety of travelers from those types of events and this type of an environment. As far as the potential liability that might be present with an approved development site, typically speaking, at least in the past, the county will put advisements and warnings as part of the recorded approval resolution or the site plans that are attached to that resolution, such that any subsequent buyer would be on notice that these conditions exist. But any visitor to the property would typically not be. Ordinarily, there would not be a consequence of liability for the county should we approve development and then that development suffer the impact, potentially catastrophic impact from a geologic event, an avalanche or a rockfall or any other type of hazard.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to agree with both Patty and Steve about the hazard and the safety on the road itself. But also, isn't that part of why we don't plow the road that far up in the winter? We cannot put our own workers in that sort of danger. And so while others may use that path to get to their properties above this, they're either snowmobiling or plowing themselves. And can't plow in a rural and remote. So they're either snowmobiling in up above or not, but we're not plowing the road to this site in the winter.
And to add on to that, that's one of the reasons we don't do emergency response in winter, regardless of the snowmobile use or anything. It's part of the conditions of accepting a development in rural remote is that you accept the fact you will not have emergency response.
Okay, Steve had an additional.
I just have one last comment. The last paragraph of my report discusses access to the Horseshoe Lode via the Midnight Mine Road, and there are 3 recommendations there for people who travel or will someday use the Horseshoe Lode as their living site. And I think that that's, all you can do, and what we should do is just request that these people be aware of that.
Exactly.
So we did think about it.
Yeah, thank you. No, we appreciate that. Do we need to move to go into executive session
Need a
for the purposes of?
Would need a motion.
That's the discretion of the board. If you would like to do so and discuss the application, then the purpose would be simply to receive advice from counsel concerning this application pursuant to CRS 246402-4B.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved to go into executive session for attorney advice. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Grassroots, that just means we'll leave the